Each year, as we approach the end of the liturgical year, the church shifts, and that'll be in 2 weeks. The church shifts focus to the end of times. And so we have that in the second reading today and in the gospel. The beginning, it'll be much more clear as we go through the next 2 weeks, but the beginning of focus on the end times. And we hear that in the gospel with the last line of the gospel, stay awake, you know neither the day nor the hour. And in focusing on the end time, there's a couple of different dimensions. One is focus on the end of the world or the end of this age. And another is, that will be when it will be. The other is one that we will all meet, and that is the end of our own lives. That will be the end of this age for us as we enter a new age. Christians, actually even Jesus himself said at one point, there are some of you standing here that will not taste death until you see all these things happen. And so theologians have gone round and round on what these things are that they have to see before they can die, because they did die. So anyway, from the very beginning, Christians have focused some attention and probably some unwarranted attention on the end time. And for 2,000 years, Christians have been saying, here it is, it's coming, it's not, and they've all been wrong. Not one of them has been right. And so the lesson there is stay calm. Stay calm, don't get uptight. In spite of all the books on the rapture and everything else now. The first letter to the Thessalonians is the first written part of the New Testament that we have. It precedes the earliest gospel by at least 10 years and probably a little bit more. And so it's the first New Testament writing that we have. And one of the things that Paul was dealing with this very same question, because early Christians were not expecting people to die until Jesus came back. So that when Christians began to die, this was a crisis of faith for the community. What does this mean? And so Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians here to not worry. They're not going to be at a disadvantage when Jesus comes, because he will raise them, and then the rest of us, all of us, not just those who are taken by the rapture, all of us will rise with him. Okay, that's what he says in today's passage. So he writes to the early church to try to calm some of those fears. Now in 2 Thessalonians, he writes back to them because, and it's the same thing that we hear at the end of Luke's gospel, men of Galilee, why are you standing here looking up to the skies? When Jesus comes, you won't miss it. It'll be like the lightning from one end of the sky to the other. Go back to work. You have work to do. Don't stand here gazing at the skies. And so in 2 Thessalonians, people had kind of quit their jobs or whatever. They were waiting for Jesus to come back, and he says, he has delayed his coming. Go back to work. Let him who will not work not eat. And it's in that context that he says that, by the way. Don't take that out of context and make it apply to things that Paul never intended it to apply to. All right. So I've hit a couple of sacred cows there in 5 minutes. And so Paul is saying, again, we do not grieve like the rest, who have no hope. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes now on the first reading and on the question of wisdom. The book of Wisdom is one of the latest books written in the Old Testament. And you noticed from today's reading that wisdom is portrayed personified. Wisdom is a woman. And this woman, when you read the book of Wisdom, this woman is with God in the beginning. It is through wisdom that God creates everything that is created. And it reminds us of the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created through him, and without him there is nothing that has been made. And so in this idea of wisdom, we begin to see the revelation of what we have come to understand as the Trinity. We begin to see that, just little hints, all right? As we see wisdom personified as God's helpmate, as the one through whom all things are created. Now, at the beginning of our reading today, it says, resplendent and unfading is wisdom, and she is readily perceived by those who love her and found by those who seek her. Fine. But then it goes on to say, she hastens to make herself known in anticipation of their desire. She hastens to make herself known in anticipation of their desire. Wisdom comes first, and then comes the seeking after wisdom. You see, that's very counterintuitive, because we think that the seeking after holiness, or the seeking after God, or the seeking after truth comes from us. I mean, that's what it feels like, certainly. And yet the teaching of the church is that God always takes the initiative, so that our desire to seek is the response to God's grace. And so if we find ourselves seeking to be holy, seeking to be more faithful to the Lord, that's the proof. That's proof that the Spirit is at work within us, that God is present within us, drawing us closer to God. The very fact that we want to draw closer to God is the proof that God is within us. I know that's counterintuitive, but that's the teaching of the church. God always takes the initiative. We respond, but the initiative is always God's. And so she hastens to make herself known in anticipation of their desire. As we continue with our worship, we give God praise and thanks. Although we are dust and ashes, the Lord draws us closer. And among the things that we pray for, let's ask the Lord for the gifts that we need. Let's ask the Lord for the wisdom and the insight that we need to be able to follow ever more faithfully. And may the peace and the power and the strength of God be with you and with your families and your loved ones always. A week at Mercy, I was the only chaplain in the hospital, so I was covering all the spiritual needs in that 16-hour shift that would arise. And so half the time I would wear a Roman collar, and the other half of the time I would wear a tie, which led to some interesting conversations, as you can imagine. Anyway, the tie that I wore most often was a Looney Tunes tie. And some of you will be old enough to recognize the reference. I did call it my God tie because my image of God is Pepe Le Pew. All right? And for those of you who don't know, Pepe Le Pew was a skunk who fell in love with a cat. And the cat just exhausted herself running away, trying to escape. And Pepe Le Pew was not discouraged. He would just run, not even run, hop after her and get himself in front of her. Oh, my cherie, my cherie. And if you will, that's our God, who is madly in love with us, constantly in pursuit of us. And this note especially for parents who are concerned about their kids who go off in another direction. Pepe Le Pew is constantly in pursuit of us. And we sometimes exhaust ourselves running the other way, and that doesn't discourage him, it doesn't bother him. He just pops up in front of us. Oh, my cherie, my cherie. So, abandon fear. Though we are dust and ashes, we are in the hands of one who loves us beyond